It was a Friday evening, just past 6 p.m., when I pulled into the driveway and saw my wife, Emily, sitting on the front steps of our porch with her elbows on her knees and that look on her face, the one she rarely ever wears, the one I only see in the rare, sharp-edged moments when the world manages to throw something at her she didn't already expect. Her hands were steady, jaw tight, and she wasn't saying a word. No smile. No sarcastic, "You're late again." Just that quiet, locked-in stare that said something had happened. I knew instantly, without asking, that this wasn't about work or groceries or neighborhood gossip. I stepped out of the car, keys still in my hand, and asked the question I already knew had an answer I wouldn't like. "What happened?" She looked up at me, eyes sharp as steel. "Someone pulled a gun on me." Time stopped. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her, that maybe she meant someone threatened her or someone flashed a weapon nearby. "Who?" I asked, the words sounding far away in my own voice. "That idiot from the HOA," she said flatly. "The one who wears the fake uniform and drives the black Tahoe with community safety decals taped to the doors." I had to sit down. I dropped onto the steps beside her and tried to process it, the wave of confusion, anger, and disbelief crashing all at once. "What do you mean he pulled a gun on you?" She exhaled, still too calm, the kind of calm she'd learned in places most people would never imagine. "He tried to pull me over. Right at the corner where Magnolia bends near the tennis courts. Claimed I rolled a stop sign. I didn't. He turned on those little flashing lights on top of his SUV, got out like he was law enforcement, told me to step out of the car. I blinked. And you did." She raised an eyebrow. "Of course I didn't. He's not a cop. I asked for ID. He refused. I told him he had no authority to detain me. That's when he reached for the weapon on his belt. Unclipped it. Hand on the grip. Said, and I quote, 'Step out now, or I will treat you as a threat to neighborhood safety.' I couldn't breathe. My vision was tunneling. He aimed it at you?" I asked. "Not fully. Not pointed. Just ready. But that's enough. That's all it takes." I stood up and began pacing the sidewalk, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We've been living in this neighborhood for 3 years. Marbled oak estates. Beautiful homes, gated entry, clean sidewalks. The kind of place that sells you peace of mind along with square footage. And somewhere along the way, the HOA decided it wasn't enough to enforce lawn care and trash day. No, they had to create a community safety division, a fancy name for a handful of middle-aged men who failed the police academy, got their hands on tactical vests, and started patrolling the neighborhood like it was Fallujah. I'd rolled my eyes at it a dozen times, laughed at the SUV with spotlight duct taped to the side mirror, the pseudo-radio chatter, the mock sweat polo shirts with sewn-on patches that said Neighborhood Patrol. But I never thought they were actually dangerous. I thought it was cosplay. Overcompensation. A bunch of HOA nerds trying to feel important. And now one of them had pulled a gun on my wife. On my wife. The same woman who'd served 3 tours overseas, trained in hand-to-hand combat, cleared buildings in complete darkness with nothing but night vision and nerves of steel. The same woman who could take down a man twice her size in 3 seconds flat, but didn't, because she'd learned restraint in places where restraint was the difference between walking home or coming back under a flag. She could have ended that man before he knew what hit him. But she didn't. She let him walk away. I didn't want to escalate it, she told me, her voice as level as ever. I wanted to see how far he'd go. My fists were clenched so tight my knuckles popped. "Did you get his name?" "Didn't need to," she said. "He made the mistake of writing me a fake citation and signing it. Calls himself Lieutenant Connors." I froze. "Lieutenant?" She nodded. "He thinks he's running an army." I took the paper from her and scanned it. Poorly printed. No official seal, a made-up citation number, and a fake badge ID. The address listed for the Community Safety Office with the HOA clubhouse. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march down the street and slam that SUV into the nearest oak tree. But Emily stood up beside me, calm and ready. "We don't do that," she said. "We do it right." "He pulled a gun on you," I snapped. "He threatened you with a firearm." She touched my arm. "Exactly. And now we do this by the book." That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a rogue neighbor with a costume. This was impersonation of law enforcement. This was assault. This was someone whose delusion had gone too far. I was going to make damn sure the HO and Lieutenant Connors Never forgot what happened when they tried to intimidate a Navy SEAL and thought no one would fight back. The morning after the incident, I found Emily in the garage, already dressed in her running gear, lacing up her boots with a kind of methodical precision that always reminded me she wasn't like other people. She didn't just wear confidence, she carried it in her bones like muscle memory. The kind you don't earn in a gym, but in places the average suburban dad has never even seen on a map. She met my eyes as I walked in and simply asked, "You ready?" I didn't need to ask what she meant. We were past outrage, past disbelief. We were in the calm surgical stage, the part where things got taken apart piece by piece until nothing was left standing but the truth. And the truth was, this man, this ridiculous toy soldier wannabe, had no idea who he threatened. He'd seen a woman behind the wheel and thought, easy target. What he didn't see was the 20 years of elite military training under her skin. What he didn't hear in her voice was the sound of a leader who'd commanded in combat zones, led extraction teams through insurgent territory, and faced real guns, real enemies, with less hesitation than he'd shown pointing a piece of plastic and metal at a suburban stop sign. I still remember the first time I learned what she really did, back when we were dating. She told me she worked in logistics for the Navy, and I bought it for about a month. Then I saw her break down and reassemble a Glock 19 blindfolded on a bet during a backyard barbecue, and realized logistics didn't usually involve pressure-triggered detonators or second languages whispered into radios. Eventually, when she trusted me enough, she told me the truth. Navy SEAL. First woman in her unit. 2 Silver Stars. 5 confirmed hostage rescues. 1 classified mission that she wouldn't even talk about in her sleep. And after retiring honorably, she wanted a simple life. Quiet house. Garden. Dogs. Maybe start a side gig training high school girls in self-defense. What she didn't sign up for was being threatened with a gun in the same kind of neighborhood that hung American flags on every mailbox. That morning, she pulled out a duffel bag from under her workbench, one I hadn't seen in years, and laid out its contents like she was dressing for war. Not weapons, no. She wasn't planning on hurting anyone. But she was preparing for accountability. There were laminated certificates, commendation letters, photocopied deployment records, a framed letter of recognition from the Department of Defense, and an official retired military ID. "You're going to need these," she said. "When you talk to the sheriff." I nodded, already dialing. We weren't going to let this get buried in some HOA grievance committee. We were taking it straight to the top. That same day, I filed a formal report with the county sheriff's department, complete with Emily's statement, my photos of the fake citation, and the signed name of the so-called Lieutenant Connors. The deputy who took the report raised both eyebrows when I slid over Emily's service record. "He pulled a gun on her," he asked slowly. "You're saying he threatened a Navy SEAL?" I nodded. "Yeah. And now we're going to see how that plays out." But Emily wasn't content to just sit and wait. She started walking the neighborhood calmly, just like always, saying hello to people, waving at kids, nodding at dog walkers, but this time people noticed something different. The way she moved, the way she watched. Word began spreading fast. At first, in whispers, then in quiet awe. Someone asked her about the incident. She didn't give details, but she didn't deny anything either. "He made a mistake," was all she said. That alone lit the fuse. By the weekend, 4 different neighbors had approached me, all telling stories of how this same guy, Lieutenant Connors, had followed them, blocked driveways, questioned teenagers, and once even banged on someone's window because their car had a temporary tag. "We all thought he was just annoying," one neighbor said. "We didn't know he was carrying." Another told me she'd stopped letting her daughter walk alone because Connors once followed her for 3 blocks under the guise of making sure she wasn't lost. I started documenting it all. Every story, every date. I called Rodriguez at the department, and we put together a preliminary case file. Impersonation of a peace officer, brandishing a weapon, threatening behavior, civil rights violation. We weren't just looking at a suspension from the HOA. We were looking at jail time. And still, he strutted around like nothing had happened, driving that ridiculous Tahoe with a CB radio wired to the dashboard, waving at people like he was proud of what he'd done. I caught him watching Emily one afternoon from the corner by the tennis courts. She saw him too. But she didn't flinch. She just stared him down motionless until he looked away first. That's when I knew this wasn't over. We started getting pushback from the HOA. The board president, a balding man with a Napoleon complex and a love for Robert's Rules of Order, emailed us to say that Connors had the full support of the Community Safety Initiative and that Emily's version of events was unverifiable and potentially exaggerated. That was the exact moment I stopped pulling punches. I forwarded the message straight to the sheriff's office. Then I sent a copy of the same message to every neighbor in our community email chain, along with a side-by-side of Emily's military ID and Connor's fake lieutenant citation. I attached the HOA president's email at the bottom and typed 2 words in bold. This is real. That night, Emily and I sat on the porch, sipping tea, watching as Connors drove past slowly again. This time, though, there were eyes on him, real ones. Behind curtains, across lawns, through camera lenses. His smile was gone, his swagger dulled. And my wife? She just took another sip, leaned back in her chair, and said, "They're starting to see him." I nodded. "And you?" She smiled just barely. "I'm waiting." And I knew exactly what she meant. Because some people beg for justice. Some demand it. But Emily, she waits. And when it finally comes, it's not loud. It's precise, professional, and irreversible. By the following week, the neighborhood was no longer whispering about Connors. They were watching him, openly, cautiously, like people finally realizing the guard dog they let into the yard might actually be a stray wolf. And to his credit, or his arrogance, he didn't flinch, not at first. He kept patrolling, kept strutting around like he was the last line of defense against suburban anarchy, even as his black Tahoe lost its shine and those discount strobe lights on his roof flickered like they'd given up. But the shift had started. It began with little things, neighbors who no longer waved, dog walkers who crossed the street to avoid him, teenagers who filmed him from behind their fences. People stopped buying into the fantasy. Because once they knew who Emily was, once they knew what she'd done for her country, what she'd survived, Connor's delusions started to look a lot more like dangerous cosplay than community enforcement. Meanwhile, I kept working behind the scenes. I compiled every report, every neighbor complaint, every photo of him blocking intersections or pacing driveways in that ridiculous tactical vest. I sent them to the sheriff's office, labeled and time-stamped. I wasn't just building a case. I was loading a legal warhead. The sheriff's office responded faster than I expected. 2 plainclothes investigators visited our home, sat with Emily and me at our kitchen table, and listened carefully as she recounted the entire event. No embellishments, no emotion, just facts, like she was delivering a mission debrief. "I never reached for a weapon," she told them. "I kept both hands on the wheel. I gave him 3 verbal warnings. When he unlatched his holster, I identified it as a threat." The officers nodded, visibly impressed. They confirmed that Connors had no law enforcement training, no permit for community patrol, and no registered authority with the county. He was, by every legal measure, just a guy with a gun pretending to be someone he wasn't. The words reckless endangerment and impersonating a public official came up, as did brandishing a firearm. I asked what the timeline was. They said, "Soon. We're building the right case. But if he tries this again, we'll be waiting." That was the moment Emily leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. "He already has." She slid a manila envelope across the table, photos of Connors stopping a young couple at the entrance gate, demanding to see a lease agreement. A printed message from a college student who said Connors followed her into her driveway and blocked her in until her dad came outside. Another one from a delivery driver who said Connors accused him of trespassing and threatened to call it in. He wasn't just playing cop, he was escalating, expanding, testing how far his fantasy could go. "That's when they snap," Emily said. "When they feel it's slipping. That's when they're the most dangerous." The lead investigator nodded solemnly. "We'll be ready." Meanwhile, the HO board went into full panic mode. After I leaked the president's dismissive email, a group of residents called for a community-wide emergency meeting. For the first time in years, it wasn't called by the board. It was called against them. People were angry, not just at Connors, but at the board for enabling him, giving him a uniform, access to resident info, and permission to enforce community safety without oversight. One man stood up at the corner of Maple and Ivy and held up a printout of Emily's service record and shouted, "You pulled a gun on this woman? Are you insane?" The crowd applauded. Emily wasn't even there. She didn't need to be. Her story had already spread, and it carried the weight of every neighbor Connors had intimidated, every child he'd stared down, every single adult who'd been too afraid to speak up until now. I received anonymous tips after that, screenshots of Connors in HOA chat groups talking about monitoring problem residents, spreadsheets he kept listing cars, addresses, and watch status. One file had the word combatant typed in all caps next to Emily's name. That was it. That was the last straw. I handed it all to the sheriff's department. That same night, they called me to say they were issuing a formal cease and desist and opening an investigation into not just Connors, but the HOA's entire internal security program. The community newsletter the following day was a joke. 2 paragraphs of empty commitment to safety and ongoing assessments, signed with the same robotic tone that had always dismissed valid concerns in favor of polished PR. But no one was buying it anymore. Connors tried to rally support, walked door to door in uniform, holding flyers that read, "Don't let criminals run our neighborhood." Only this time, doors didn't open. People filmed him instead. Some slammed their doors in his face. One woman, bless her soul, said, she was a SEAL, right? You're lucky all you got was a letter. The next day, Connors filed a formal complaint against us for harassment. The sheriff's office laughed. So did our neighbors. That was when we knew he was spiraling, losing grip. A man who had spent so long pretending to be powerful now faced the one thing he couldn't fake: consequences. Emily stayed calm through all of it. She spent her mornings running 5 miles, her afternoons tending the garden, her evenings watching documentaries with me like nothing was happening. But I could tell beneath that calm was the kind of stillness you only see right before lightning strikes. I asked her one night, what would you have done if he'd actually drawn on you? She didn't blink. Neutralized the threat. Disarmed. Subdued. Called it in. And she could have. That's what haunted me the most. He didn't just threaten a civilian. He almost made a move on someone who would have ended the situation in under 3 seconds with muscle memory and zero regret. And if she had, it would have been legal. And he would have been the one bleeding on the sidewalk. The irony didn't escape me. But we weren't seeking violence. We were seeking justice. And it was finally catching up to him. The sheriff's department planned a formal intervention, one last step before charges. They just needed one more mistake, one more false stop, one more act of impersonation. And that's when Emily smiled. He won't be able to resist, she said. Not once we show up to the next HOA meeting. Why? I asked. Because we're not afraid anymore, she said. And men like him, they feed on fear. When you take that away, they flail. Then they fall. And just like that, the final act was set. The night of the HOA meeting was thick with humidity and tension. The air so heavy you could almost taste the unease as residents trickled into the community center with folded chairs, notepads, and the kind of quiet anticipation that only comes when people know something big is about to happen, even if they're not sure exactly what. Emily and I arrived together, calmly, side by side. She wore a simple navy blue blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, her retired SEAL ID card tucked neatly into her wallet just in case anyone decided to question who she was or what she'd been through. I wore the same look I used on the job when interviewing suspects, composed, unreadable, but ready to cut through any lie tossed my way. The HOA president sat stiffly at a long folding table at the front of the room, flanked by 2 clipboard jockeys who'd clearly lost their nerve since the sheriff got involved. And across the room, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed and fake community enforcement badge clipped to his belt like it still meant something, was Connors. He didn't smile when we walked in. He just stared. That same dead-eyed bravado he always wore like body armor. He looked like a man who still thought he might win. The meeting began like every HOA meeting does, slow, stiff, filled with procedural nonsense about budget overruns and lawn height violations. But then came the item we'd all been waiting for: Community Safety Initiative, Review, and Resident Feedback. The president's voice cracked a little when he read it aloud. At this time, we welcome public comment on recent concerns related to safety enforcement practices. That was our cue. I stood up. My name is Alex Walker. I've lived here with my wife for 3 years, and I'm here to speak about the man in this room who pulled a gun on her and pretended to be a cop while doing it. The room went completely silent. I could hear the air conditioner hum. A couple of people gasped. Connors straightened, his jaw twitching. That's slander, he barked. You better watch what you're saying. I turned to the board. We filed a formal report with the sheriff's office. There's a case pending. Witnesses, surveillance, digital files, and a statement from a decorated Navy SEAL, my wife. Emily stood beside me, calm as ever, and slowly pulled out her ID. She didn't wave it around. She didn't need to. The moment people saw the emblem, the words Department of Defense, the meeting shifted. No one interrupted. No one sneered. They just listened. I was stopped without cause, Emily said, voice steady, by someone with no authority, who threatened me with a weapon, who tried to force me out of my vehicle, who used fear to control people. She looked directly at Connors. That ends tonight. Connors stepped forward. I acted within the authority granted to me by this board and the Safety Initiative Charter, which doesn't exist. I cut in, holding up a binder. I went through your bylaws. There is no clause permitting citizen stops. No language authorizing weapon carry. No position titled lieutenant. You made it up. Murmurs filled the room. Someone in the back said, I knew it. Another, he stopped my daughter last month. The floodgates opened. A dozen people stood shouting stories, encounters where Connors had followed them, yelled at them, accused them of things he had no right to police. The board looked panicked. The president tried to regain order, but it was like trying to plug a dam with a napkin. Emily walked to the front, set her ID on the table, and leaned in. You let him build a fantasy with a badge. You gave him power without oversight. And he nearly pulled a trigger because of it. This is harassment. Connors shouted. You're all just mad because I actually keep people safe. You scared people. Someone yelled from the crowd. You scared kids. You threatened me, another voice added. Connors took a step back. For the first time, the confidence cracked. Then the doors opened, and in walked two deputies. Calm, uniformed. One of them made eye contact with me and nodded. Robert Connors, the lead deputy said, we have a warrant for your arrest, impersonating a law enforcement officer and brandishing a weapon. The room erupted, not in cheers, not in chaos, but in stunned, almost reverent silence. Connors' face went white. He tried to argue, but they had him in cuffs before he could get out more than a sentence. As they read him his rights, he glanced at Emily. You think you're better than everyone just because you were military? She looked him dead in the eye. No, I'm just better than you. And that was it. The moment. The line. The fall. The deputies let him out of the building, while phones recorded and jaws hung open. The HOA president mumbled something about a full review and quietly slipped out the side door. The board crumbled within a week. Resignations, restructuring, a full audit of the Community Safety Initiative that revealed nothing but ego, fake uniforms, and liability disasters waiting to happen. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. For the better. Real safety guidelines were established with actual law enforcement consultation. The fake security patrol was disbanded. Kids biked freely. Dogs barked without getting glared at. People started to talk to each other again, not through fines, but through trust. Emily went back to her morning runs. I went back to my routine. And every time we walked past the now empty parking spot where Connors used to sit in his black Tahoe with his little fantasy flashing lights, we didn't say anything. We didn't have to, because the neighborhood had seen it all. And they remembered who stood tall, who told the truth, and who finally brought it all down without ever raising her voice. And me? I got to watch the woman I love do what she's always done, face danger head on, and walk away standing taller than ever. She didn't need vengeance. She needed justice. And she got it. Connors? He'll never play cop again. And if he ever forgets why, he can look up the case file sealed with one very specific line in the official report. Suspect attempted to assert control over a retired Navy SEAL. Mistake was corrected.